our brains are wired in a certain way, right? And, we might be kind of created to interact and behave in certain structures which aren't appropriate, or we make decisions very poorly. So how can we kind of mean more data? So it's almost augmenting, the base humanity, which we can all raise this, and bring in new data systems so we can communicate better.
So I'm here with Casey Wahl, founder of Wahl+Case, EQIQ, and Attuned.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a few more in there.
It's a list. Yeah. I think we'll get
down,
to this. I'm excited to talk about all of them. And so I wanted to kind of start at the beginning. You have a very global background. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how that affected your drive to become an entrepreneur.
So I was born in upstate New York, in Rochester, which is a smaller, less dead Detroit, where I think dreams go to die. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous, but there wasn't a lot of, it wasn't a town on the up. Let's say that it had its best days maybe in the 1860s. So anyways, my parents got out of there when I was one. We went to Houston for a little while. I was in a hurricane in Houston. Pretty much after that, we went to Saudi Arabia, where it doesn't rain. So I grew up in the deserts of Saudi Arabia from when I was like 1.5 until maybe 15. And then I went to a boarding school kind of south of Boston, college in Texas, and I came to Japan after that. So actually, I've now lived in Japan the longest, then Saudi Arabia the second, and the US, where I'm American, kind of the third. So. So inside, it's pretty Japanese. So in terms of like the entrepreneurialism, like, I don't know if it's kind of a DNA thing. Probably every American has, right? Most people, have been immigrants, and somebody took a huge step going into the unknown, lots of risk, and just have to kind of figure out and go through all of kind of the overcoming the obstacles as it happens. So I think that's it. Like, my father worked for an oil company. He didn't have a college education. He started out in like the oil fields working on the pipeline type of thing like that. And then he, grew up to be kind of the SAP project manager, which became the biggest SAP project in the world.
That's amazing.
So it was a very kind of stable life, right? And, living in the middle of a desert, like a 1950s idyllic kind of U.S. military town type of thing like that. But I was always getting in trouble all the time. I think maybe rather than the locations per se, because if you look around, like the kids that I grew up with, like it was a small town. It was only 900 people, right? And my graduating class in middle school was, 16 people, maybe? Like we went through a Gulf War. We had to carry our gas masks to school every day. I made pacts with like friends of mine that, they would give me the chemical warfare shots and I would give them the chemical warfare shots. So, there were a lot of kind of obstacles and challenges that came through, but it was all kind of fun as a kid. But I don't think many of them became entrepreneurs. So could you just say it was the international background? I think it's something just in the strange DNA complex that came out with me, and kind of always testing rules. And now I have quite a few kids. I don't know how many will be entrepreneurs, but I can see the last one is she's probably only got one path in life, and that's to be an entrepreneur. Just always testing every rule, testing every boundary, just slowly doing it, tons of energy, just going all over the place. And I think I was a lot like that as a kid. So I would probably put it a little bit more DNA rather than that environment for internationalism.
Nice. And so throughout all of that, eventually, like you mentioned, it led to Japan, and you've spent most of your time here. What made Japan the right place for that sort of settling down or that cultivating of business?
So I think with Japan, like it's a very attractive place for people in the world right now. I think when I came, it was, it still is. Like I've heard people describe it as like kind of Mars on Earth. Like it's the most different kind of culture that you can kind of get to. And it was like a big adventure. I grew up in the Middle East. I kind of had that in my blood to a sense, traveled a bunch. So like when I came, it was a big adventure. I think a lot of people come to Japan that way, but then there's this 2-year line, right? You know, and you go through that kind of cycles of acclimation and depression and everything. And I don't know what the percentage is. I just guess maybe 60, 70% of people go back at 2 years. That's it. I got Japan out of my system. Now I'm going to go back and get to kind of my real life. And for me, it was kind of like that. To certain extents, like I spent 2 years in Oita on the JET program. You know, I was doing like Kokusai Koryuin, giving like speeches plus, you know, English teaching. Beautiful, nice people, but I hated the job to all hell. I kind of wanted to do something more in Japan, so I just fell into recruitment back in the day. Like fast forwarding it to starting this company, it's kind of like why Japan, it's the market, you know, right? So it's the Japan geographical market and kind of the business climate and the relationship driven kind of business that it is, plus recruitment as we initially founded the company. You know, when you become an entrepreneur, like if you take MBA classes, there's this like BCG graph, right? Like the 4 quadrants type of thing. And if the market is growing and you know the market, then you get in the upper right-hand quadrant, you're most likely to have success. So like, I guess that is the thoughtful, that's what most smart people try to do and position their startup there. I just, oh yeah, let's do this. That was more feeling.
Nice, nice. Kind of continuing on that thought about your MBA, you actually received it in Spain and Europe, and I feel like that's almost like a through line of that global, maybe not upbringing, but global mindset. Was there reasoning behind that, or what was sort of your thoughts of going to Spain specifically?
Of course, there was quite a lot of reasoning, quite a lot of logic behind it. So when we founded the company, I was like 30, 31, and I looked young. Like I probably looked in my like late teens or early 20s. I didn't have these lines. I didn't have kind of all the, you know, stresses that you have as an entrepreneur. And we were doing executive searches with country managers, Asia Pacific, founders, kind of global searches. Like one of our first ones was, you know, we went to Tesla headquarters. You know, we were meeting with the CTO, like JT Shable, you know, and getting these things. And I look young and like a little kid, really, you know, and I didn't necessarily have that credibility. And one of the co-founders, he had an MBA, you know, from a top school. And just, you know, by saying, I have an MBA from here, which he very proudly said in every single conversation in the introduction, there just was like kind of a light or a checkbox that went off, and you know, whoever was in the Kei Kikaku Shitsu type of thing, they went to University of Tokyo, they went to this, okay, I'm speaking with an equal here. And even though I felt intelligence-wise, you know, and I knew what I was doing, that I could have a seat at the table, that box wasn't getting checked off. And then I was just amazed at the network. Like it just opened so many doors, the alumni network. So I'm like, okay, you know, we like pretty early on, you know, the first year we pretty much broke even. The second year we had profits. And like it was a small team, like, okay, if I'm ever going to do this, I need to do it now. So we wanted to be a very global company. That was always part of the vision. And, you know, we said, okay, throughout Asia, we have connections, you know, Silicon Valley, we have connections, but we have nothing in Europe and South America type of thing. So this is where I start going towards IE. As I dug deeper, you know, it was basically a 1-year program versus US universities, which tend to be 2-year programs. It was much, much cheaper. I think 1/3 of the price of like a top US school. It was #1, like IE in Madrid was #1 on many rankings and kind of the FT. So all of these things were coming together. I think like the cherry on the cake was you didn't have to do the GMAT. Like this is fun. Yeah, I don't want an MBA that much that I want to spend a lot of time studying for the GMAT. So did that. But it turned out to be an absolutely fantastic school. Love the people, love the education. I signed up for a 12-month program, and actually I was doing it executive MBA bi-weekly from Tokyo. So I would leave Tokyo on a Thursday morning. I get to Madrid like past midnight on Thursday. I had school all day on Friday from 8 a.m. to maybe 6 p.m., then Saturday 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. type of thing. Then I get on an airplane 6 a.m., you know, on Sunday, get back on Monday into Japan, and then I do the same thing 10 days later. So I kind of signed up for this. I made the budget and everything like that, okay, the 1 year I can handle this. But as soon as I got there, they gave me the schedule, and it's a 16-month program now. Never told me that. I was like, all right, welcome to IE type of thing like that. So that was kind of the motivation. Absolutely fantastic. Once I did have that MBA, it would just, you could see like, if somebody has it, it's just a box, and the eyes change and the credibility changes type of thing like that. So in some ways it's unfortunate, but it's also very helpful. And I could pay less many people paid and take less time.
That's great. That's great. Nice. And I want to talk about startup culture in Japan, and I think a good place to start is with Redbrick Ventures, which is one of the companies I think that we had alluded to a little bit at the beginning.
One of them.
Yeah. And honestly, it's something that like I didn't know about before joining Wahl+Case, but I found super interesting after joining, and just that spirit of innovation. And so I wanted to kind of ask you about like what was that inspiration behind Redbrick, and maybe just the story of Redbrick Ventures.
So when we founded the company in 2010, there wasn't like the startup ecosystem now. Like, I mean, being an entrepreneur was pretty rare back then. There wasn't capital really. There wasn't a support network. There wasn't co-working spaces kind of everywhere. So again, pretty quickly, like within a couple of years too, we were growing quite well. You know, we had extra cash, we kind of had extra capacity, we knew the market and stuff like this. So there was this, you know, pay it forward mentality. Okay, let's give back. You know, let's help build this startup ecosystem. And you know, like I think we were going through like co-working ideas and stuff like that for a while, and you know, co-working isn't a really high value thing. Was I kind of crossed that one out. But one of our customers at Wahl+Case, the recruiting, was a company called Rocket Internet, and they became quite famous for getting like copy startups and blowing those up, getting them very, very big, scaling very, very quickly. And they had a certain model. They'd hire a certain type of young person from a quite elite, maybe institutional, like consulting or finance background, put them as CEO, and then work them extremely hard. And there was kind of a setup. We got to know them quite well, to the point where I was on the phone arguing with the founders because they were refusing to pay bills that they owed, type of thing like that. And they had a reputation for having very sharp elbows. And we experienced those as well. And kind of knowing the different parts of Japan was, like, Japan is relationship driven, and all their startups failed, and they actually exited Japan relatively early, and I could see, okay, you had all these problems. On the other side, we were meeting a lot of elite Japanese, you know, at McKinsey, University of Tokyo, whatever it might be, Goldman Sachs, and they were all saying in 2010, 2011, 2012, hey, you know, it's amazing you're an entrepreneur. You became an entrepreneur in this, you know, downturn of market. Wow, this is crazy. I'd love to be an entrepreneur. That's so cool. So we were hearing these people, you know, the candidate side, young, energetic people, and there was this kind of bubbling Japanese pride where we need to make the next Sony. You know, it's so disappointing Japan doesn't have startups. We don't have these great companies. So I was kind of feeling that, you know, these people here, we learn the model kind of from Rocket Internet and say, okay, let's do Rocket Internet with a heart, where we kind of actually care. And that's where we started. So and back at the time, there was still like a time lag, so there was idea arbitrage. So because we were plugged into San Francisco and Silicon Valley, we could see what startups were hot and which were very cool. And at the time, it was about 6 to 9 months before somebody would try to do it here. So we could kind of go through, we had like whole decks and Excel sheets, and it's like, okay, let's do these. And then we recruited the founder, we put in a little bit of money, type of thing like that. I think we ended up doing, 5 companies/projects, and they all failed.
Yeah. That's the market. I feel like and so actually kind of continuing on that as well, like what do you feel you would do maybe different today, or how do you see the market being different now versus what it was when Redbrick was established?
I think that was my second MBA, really. You know, I was doing it concurrently with the MBA, but you know, we're going from a professional services recruitment business where it's kind of people oriented, building management systems, to trying to build a tech product and like a different type of entrepreneurialism where it's kind of a different type of scale and trying to find product market fit, right? I already knew product market fit for recruiting and how to get customers and all that type of thing. So I kind of learned how to do a tech startup, and we lost a lot of money. It was very painful, tons of horrible conversations. Even to the point, one of the founders who was so dedicated, worked so hard, was thinking about committing suicide. And like only later did I know that he was daydreaming about suicide at that time, and it was coming back from, you know, the Japan where you couldn't admit failure, right? He couldn't admit failure to his parents, you know, to his fiance, type of thing, and that was the only way out. Like the startup was clearly going down, type of thing like this. So got to learn a lot of things kind of very painfully. So if I did it all again, I wouldn't do it. I would have this knowledge, right? That's the premise of the question. I have this knowledge, so hell no, I wouldn't do that. The big mistake was, one of the biggest of the many, many mistakes is we were doing unaligned businesses. So we did like a moms and kids e-commerce baby platform type of thing like that. We did a closed social network. It was really cool to have your own social network for a while. Had one. And then a few others, but none of them were related to, the core premise for starting Wahl+Case. They weren't related to recruitment or talent management. So, the value that we could add as Redbrick Ventures beyond, recruiting, helping with the team, putting the initial money in, is I would help them as kind of the entrepreneur in many ways, like how to get over, here's a problem, well, here's the spirit to get over it, and let's attack this type of thing. And some of the people that we brought in weren't that deep of entrepreneurs, say, it's getting tough, okay, time to hang up the boots, kind of move on type of thing like that. So I think not having aligned businesses and just doing it yourself is the biggest mistake beyond just doing it.
That's fair. And kind of on that thought as well, you have a book called The Quiet Comeback.
Two books.
Go ahead. I want to talk about The Quiet Comeback.
That's the only one in English.
That's the only one I know.
Okay.
But it features similar stories actually from a lot of other entrepreneurs. And recently it actually reached #1 on the Amazon bestseller list again after 5 years.
Not #1, but I got pretty close. Again, after 5 years.
Yeah, after
it was #1 in like
publishing.
a big category.
Yeah,
not #1 on all of
yes.
Amazon.
Yeah.
So when it was released, it became #1 on all of Amazon.
That's amazing. And so 5 years after publishing, though, what do you feel like led to that renewed interest?
I think there's kind of two parts. I mean, one is why did it shoot up? And, I think there's influencers, and the people that I interviewed at that time, many of them have exited or crashed in big ways, and there's been a couple of scandals, there's kind of been big things, and, it seems those events can drive kind of peaks of sales too. I think certain influencers that read it, kind of do that type of thing. But the startup ecosystem now is quite mature in many ways. Like, there's still not a tremendous amount of literature, and I would say kind of like real literature beyond kind of like a formulaic system where it's actually talking about the human side of building a startup and kind of what that means. And that book, I think, is kind of unusual. And, there's Japanese tend to like a certain category where you talk about Japan, but from Western eyes or from foreign eyes type of thing like that. They like reading about themselves, but with a different angle. And I think kind of being a foreigner, I could really, and also being an entrepreneur, I could flesh out, and also probably being a recruiter and interviewing many people and kind of going with that, is flesh out and get them to talk about like real pain stories. And I don't think there's many books like that. There's the typical kind of man in the hole, like story structure where somebody writes their own biography, right? I was good, then it was really tough, and then I became awesome at the end. Like, these books were like, no, it was a slog, and it was tough, and it was horrible, And I think that still remains relatively unique. So, when people are looking for kind of that chicken soup for the soul when they're stuck in entrepreneurship, there's not too many things to reach for in Japan.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to the market being much different now, much more fertile now. What would you say are maybe the biggest contrasting factors between now and then when you were starting your companies?
Oh, everything. I mean, everything. Like, there's no comparison. How many successful entrepreneurs are there now, like within tech, meaning that they've had an exit or that they've listed? Several hundred. Maybe at the time there were a couple, like Cyber Agent and a couple like, Mikitani-san. There were very, very few iconic cases, but now there's hundreds. Just the amount of collective knowledge, like how many meetups, like today, how many discussions about startups, are Clubhouse is going nuts right now between the VC. Like, so many people are talking about that, plus meetups, plus events. There's probably thousands going on today. Probably back then there were 1, 2, right? And, you were going to like Taitoku way out there, and like it was kind of weird, and people in suits reading very formally about entrepreneurship. So it was so different. There's a lot more money, there's a lot more talent, people understand, I think startups can be learned, right? It is a system. Like, there is ways to go through each stage of growth, and how you do it. It is a formula in many ways. And I think Japan has collectively got enough knowledge within the startup community to do that now. So, I think really from my perspective, what is left is still, I think you need the gradations of talent to join the startups at different phases. You have like your 0 to 1 phase where people kind of do many jobs, are kind of scrappy, can deal with kind of no systems. You're going on that dirt road. Then the next stage is where you have the gravel, and you need a different type of personality and a different type of motivation to do that. And then once you're really scaling, it's like, okay, these are systems, these are processes, and let's just go as fast as we can down the highway. And in Japan, it's still expected for, I think, the founders and the team to go from the beginning to the end. And if we can have like talent going in and out, and this is my specialty. Hey, you're at 1 million ARR and you want to go to 5 million ARR, I'm your man or I'm your woman, and that's the time to do it, and then I'm gone. And both sides know exactly what they're good at. I think there's still not enough of that. And I think that once that happens, it'll get even more likely to have bigger success and bigger scaling.
That's awesome. And I think that your influence on that culture is a little bit more prevalent, I think, than we've even touched on now, including the film Startup Girls, which is the first startup.
Poster right over there, yeah?
Yeah. I don't know if it's in the shots.
Who set up these camera angles, right? You didn't get the signed poster.
That's what you mean. We'll get some B-roll.
Letter to the producers, please.
And so I wanted to talk about kind of what was the aim maybe behind making that film? Was it really to push the culture, or what inspired it? Startup Girls. Yeah,
it was to reach a broader kind of, what's the English word? Like more ippang audience, like kind of a more regular audience type of thing. So with the book, I did a lot of speaking events. After like kind of like book tour and whatever, went to Apple Store, 100 people. And always the most interesting part for me is like after talking about it is the people would come up and there'd be a line of like 10 or 20 people and you'd be there for 30, 45 minutes. And you get an interesting story. Hey, I read this book and I didn't quit my company. I kept on because somebody else, like I read a very similar story, or, I was thinking about it and then this book gave me the courage. I know actually really what it is that I'm going to get into. And it was that changing lives that was really meaningful for me. And there were certainly, at least a handful that I know of directly. But I wanted to do that at a much bigger scale. And then really to help kind of normalize startup culture. Like just the average person needs to understand the words startup and kind of what it means, and that this is a career choice and this is a life choice, and put that into kind of regular films, and that was the idea to it. So the first book, became Amazon #1, did really well. When I wrote it, it was just something creative that I had to get out. Like it was a baby that needed to be born, and I really thought I'd only sell like 25 copies, and most to my mom. But it did very, very well, right? And Startup Girls, the movie, became a very similar thing. And like, because the first one did so well, the publisher was giving me a lot of pressure. Hey, you need to write the second one. We're onto something. Here's something we can monetize this a bit further. The market has changed. There's new stories. There's new technologies. And I hated writing the first one. It was horrible. Like I hated it. It was so painful. So I kept saying no. And then just fortuitously, I met somebody who knew startups, somebody who produced movies, somebody who I got along very well. And like I pitched him on the spot and he's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then like that weekend I started writing, he's like, why don't you make the first synopsis? So I wrote the first synopsis, sent it to him. He read it over the weekend, sent it back, and we started making the script, and it was just this, ping pong back and forth, and it became kind of exciting. And then it got released in 2019 all across Japan, with probably one of the most famous stars out there now.
Nice. Yeah, I loved it. That's one of my, I remember hearing about that when I first joined the company, and it's one of those things that makes it feel so new, so progressive in both ways almost. I think that you've touched on this a little bit before too. With it is almost an empowerment story as well, which I think is something that Japan could use a lot of.
Well, that was kind of it. Like, we're getting there. We're thinking, like, I wrote the original script with like female characters, and I'm like, if I'm going to do this, why don't we just make it, women characters? This is, let's two birds in one stone. Let's do this.
Yeah.
But like those first meetings, as we got into dealing with the talent agency and the movie, like they wanted to say venture or they, startup. What is this? And explaining that, like, it was so difficult. So it was kind of one of those things. Like, I think the movie is having a long tail, and it does change people's lives. And we've heard of people starting companies from watching it, but it's probably the first one that kind of pushed the envelope a little. And I think there'll be more that might be more impactful afterwards. But
yeah, I'm excited. So I wanted to talk more also about some of the companies that you're currently running.
Only one.
Yeah, I guess so.
Only one.
Currently a part of, I guess, or currently.
So we have EQIQ, and then we have two business lines. Wahl+Case, the recruitment business line, and Attuned, the SaaS, intrinsic motivation business line.
Nice. And so, I wanted to focus first on Wahl+Case.
I do, not much.
Yeah, I guess so. But with
I guess so.
let's dive a little bit deeper into that. So
about me not doing very much.
About the business itself, what kind of drove you to make a recruitment business, and then also what you feel like the result has been. So it's been about 11 years now, and so for you, I know that the original mission was to kind of fix recruitment. And even within that, it sort of implies that it was broken or is still broken. What are some of the parts that you feel were the most broken or really drove you to start Wahl+Case?
So when we founded it back in 2010, it was very little innovation in recruitment, right? I think the innovation was sending resumes from fax to email. Like, that was the big deal. At the previous company I was at, like, I was kind of part of the board in Japan, and I would go to board meetings and here's this idea, and here's another idea, and here's another one. I think 2 years of that just got shot down. It's like, shut up, you aggressive American. We're making a lot of money. All those sound like they're going to lose, a lot of ideas. So it just became a point where, I kind of structured it in like my own story to myself as like a fight for my soul. Like, I either can make a lot of money at the company I was at and, not use my brain, not try things, and kind of my soul dies at 30 years old, or I can kind of go out there and see how good it is, do these, ideas and belief have a lot of resonance. But at the heart of it is I love recruitment. I absolutely love it. I think it's extremely difficult. And, through all of the years, I heard so many, I want to swear, say, hey, it's not rocket science, but it is. It is. Like, how many, neurons do we have in our brain? How do you go about making decisions? And like, when you're making some of these big life decisions where you don't have enough information, about the market, about the company that you're joining, about anything type of thing, and then you have your social people, kind of like relationships kind of impacting this. How do people go about making decisions about these big life events? It's all messed up, and it's extremely complex with all these biases, and so it's just like rocket science. And I think that aspect of it, where you are having an impact on businesses and, watching businesses change and the appreciation and, of course, changing lives, was always something that was very important. But there was so much waste. There was so much time wasted. There was so much emotional waste, so much psychological waste, financial waste. Like, the system is clearly broken, but there really is no other kind of system. And, I don't, like, one of the things that I liked about it's a problem for a lifetime. Like, you ask kind of what have we solved? Well, not much, to be honest. I think we've done quite well. We've got a great NPS score, like our clients and candidates rave about it. And this is something that the team's done very well. And we've been copied by a lot of our competitors. We've been trolled by a lot of our competitors, a lot, and they say imitation is the best form of flattery. Like, we'd had people in the company that get pissed off, hey, they're doing what we were doing, type of thing like that. But that's what you can do. But within the business model of recruitment, there's not that much you can change. You can do kind of 1% kind of changes, and over time, those will have a big impact. But you have to come up with different business models. And I think that's where the combination of kind of Redbrick Ventures, understanding different business models, how can you have a delivery system with recruitment? It's me or the consultant going to whatever my spectrum is. Is it 10 clients, 5 clients, 20? Or can we build like a platform or a system where we can do it at a much bigger impact? So I was trying to get that far, and I think with Attuned now that we are at the stage where we can make part of the impact. Are we going to solve the problem completely? No, because again, it's very, very complex, but still young, still have some good minds, right? So I think we have a lot more to go, and it's that having a problem for a lifetime is exciting.
Nice. I totally agree. And so kind of touching on Attuned as well, I feel like in so much of work, the focus has really been on external motivation. And as far as I know, Attuned seems to be like the first actual SaaS product that is really focused on that internal intrinsic motivation. And so I wanted to kind of talk to you about, how do you feel Attuned updates work? Like, how do you feel like it updates that viewpoint of really focusing on the external motivation with like bonuses or something like that in work versus the intrinsic motivation that Attuned really hones in on?
I think at the moment we're just really at the tip of the iceberg of kind of changing work, but I really believe that we'll change it globally. And it's kind of like the elevator, when the elevator was invented. When you elevator invented, okay, here's this thing that goes up and down, but the buildings are only 3 stories high. What can you do with an elevator? And 3 stories high, you have stairs, perfectly functional. But because the elevator there, now you can start to make skyscrapers, right? And I think Attuned is going to play that role. It's like, okay, we have a certain level of kind of organization and relationship, kind of formation and communication within organizations, but people don't know how to communicate and understand each other on a deeper level, right? We can see all the surface information we pick up with our eyes and our ears, but what is driving that person? What is that person's value? If you ask me without Attuned, could I say what your values are, even though we've been speaking? No, I couldn't, right? I could feel it. I have thousands of hours of recruitment experience, 10,000 hours of kind of interviews, but I still couldn't get it right. And I think that's kind of the driver. So everybody within organizations can understand each other better, right? And of course, this is going to have higher diversity, but I think in terms of like the levels of human relationships is where you can really understand somebody for who they are, and allow them to express themselves in a way that they want, of course, align with the company. And ultimately, Attuned's going to help doing that. We're not there, still plenty of room to grow, but I think it will be kind of the OS for organizational structure and communication and relationship building going in the future.
Nice. That's great. And kind of looking at the future, in through the lens of maybe like the quiet comeback, what if you could write a chapter on Wahl+Case, EQIQ, Attuned, EQIQ, I guess, being the company, what would you say?
I don't want to write my own book. Like that's why, like the story isn't so interesting. Like I think we, maybe this sounds a bit too ego-driven. It's like we want to get big enough and have enough impact that there's going to be people writing about us, right? There's going to be multiple stories of EQIQ and Attuned and how we change kind of the world of work and talent management and, all of these stories and kind of that along the way. Yeah, like honestly, it feels we're just almost 11 years in, but it's just starting. It took a long time to get here, and there's, a ton of scars inside. Like psychologically, it's all scarred up, right? But I think now we have a fantastic team. Like, there's times I haven't enjoyed coming to work, and I didn't like, some of the people that I worked with, and founder of the company, why? Type of thing. That's not healthy. But I love it. Like, we have great people, we have great management team. I think it's aligned, and one of our kind of weaknesses or my weaknesses is trying too many things, so even though our base isn't so strong, we have kind of had multiple business lines almost throughout the whole history of the company. So it stretches resources very thin. And now we don't. Now, okay, Wahl+Case is very strong, stable, great brand, market presence, very good team, great management team, and then the management bench is fantastic. And Attuned has found product market fit. And it's kind of simple from here.
Yeah, and so the kind of thesis of EQIQ is Humanity+Data. And I just wanted to hear you go over what led to that creation and what that means to you and what you hope it will mean to everyone.
Well, I think just as humans and as people, we have a hard time like going through the world. Life is difficult, communicating with other people, whether, they're your intimates and your spouses and your partners or people at work. It's tough. and you have different people and different value sets and different lived experiences and different thoughts. And how do you handle that? That's very, very difficult. So I think there's two components to it, and one comes from the recruiting side of the business, Wahl+Case, and that's the humanity. Like, I don't think a platform or data is going to fully disrupt like talent management and hiring and how we deal with the work relationship. It's still about humans, about communicating and feeling connected and feeling understood. And there's a lot of different energy and chemicals that come with it that can only be done on a human side, right? But we're flawed animals. Like, our brains are wired in a certain way, right? And we might be kind of created to interact and behave in certain structures which aren't appropriate, or we make decisions very poorly. So how can we kind of mean more data? So it's almost augmenting, the base humanity, which we can all raise this, and bring in new data systems so we can communicate better, so we can be happier at work, so we can kind of really be more productive and happy and live kind of fuller lives. So, so much of your time is non-private, where you are going out into the public sphere and you're part of it. And how many people really enjoy it? Not that many, probably, right? And so can we help people make better decisions for that, be onboarded, communicate kind of daily? That's where we bring the data side, while always keeping the humanity in mind, right? We don't want to become one of these tech companies that data is everything and we forget what it is to be human.
That's great. That's great. Casey, thank you so much for your time. It's great talking to you. Always a pleasure. Let's definitely do it again soon.